Haha. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, my name is Carpo, and while I'm working, I'm going to make a video and talk about some stuff. I've made a lot of videos talking about stuff, so one more won't hurt. This one is, I guess, would be entitled kind of what does it mean to be alive, or rather, do you choose to be happy? This is like one of those corny subjects that people are like, whatever. You hear a lot about happiness. You hear a lot of people tell you how to be happy. I guess maybe what brought this on was my mom told me something about this show she was watching. I don't know what show it was, the Today Show, or one of those popular TV shows, and they had somebody on, this guru guy, and the word guru, of course, to me is just kind of like a joke. I mean, I respect gurus, but television gurus are usually just kind of a joke, And she asked me, what I thought about like Deepak Chopra and stuff like that. And we've had conversations about this in the past, and I have really no opinion. I say, each person has their own spiritual path. If they choose to adhere to a certain moral principle or value system, then it may help them, maybe hinder them. I don't know. It's really an individual plight. But one thing I've heard from most of the quote gurus that I've read from or heard from was that they all say the same thing, that you have to find the truth within. And it was because what caught me, I guess, was she said that the guy claimed that he had never read any books on spirituality and never done any research in that category, so he was, quote, untainted, in that way, that he wasn't, I guess tainted is the perfect word for it, that his consciousness wasn't tainted by other ideas. And I thought, that's novel, that's really cool, but at the same time, there's a certain degree of awareness that has to come from exploring other avenues of thought, as well as understanding other people. Everybody knows that to be happy, which it means to be informed, that means you have a round view of thought on many different subjects, so you can develop a consensus view on your own, yet at the same time get a consensus view from others, where everyone, if you see how many people agree or disagree, and then you have to weigh that against what you believe to be the truth. And, because numbers of people who believe something never determine whether it's true or not. But it's very difficult for a person to, try to express themselves when they are the only ones and they think everyone else is wrong. So it's kind of going against the flow. So anyway, knowing thyself means knowing thy world, I guess. And that's why it's kind of a more rounded view just makes for a happier life, period. I've had so many different thought patterns in my life that, I respect every other person who's at their state where they're at, not above or below. Like, it's you gotta be careful not to tell people things like, well, I used to think like you did, because as soon as you say something like that, they assume you think you're being superior. I made that mistake the other day. I was like, well, I used to think that too, and then my mom cut me off. She's like, what? But now you're better than that. I was like, no. See, because I don't believe that there's any particular stage that means you've really, in terms of research and education, there are varying stages. We all get little bits of information at different times. The real growth comes from moral values and integrities, ones that we hold within. Those are different than what we've learned. So if you were using that and describing moral values by saying, oh, I've been where you are, but now I have better morals, you would insinuate that you're growing. But that is a truth too, and one that a lot of people ignore. And something that I like to bring up is that, I made a couple videos in the past where I said, are there better people, or are there superior people? And I get feedback from people who are saying, hey, it's wrong to insinuate that anybody could be better. But on the other hand, it's really easy for us to point the finger at people who are worse. In other words, we don't want anybody to be better than other people or have more than other people, but we don't want people to have nothing or less or be, well, it's kind of hard to explain, I guess, but it's a fine balance that comes with everything, you know. Life is just one of those things. Everybody has their own opinions and their own ideas about what's important. And here I sit rambling to my camera, clipping away. There's only one thing that I can say for sure about happiness, and that's the truth, that it really does come from within. That everyone's trying to market and sell us happiness, and marketing and advertising is just ludicrous. And sometimes, you know, when I hear people complaining and saying, you know, look at the system and look at what it's doing to us, look at what it's doing to people, I'm always the one who says, you know, quit blaming the system, blame yourself, because you're part of the system. But I do understand that viewpoint, that, you know, it really is an out of control entity, the entirety of, you know, marketing, the telling us what makes us happy. I mean, it's insane to look back at the 60s and see them telling us that cigarettes will make us happier people or sexier people, and people totally bought into it, and I just can't even believe it, you know. But I can't believe it, but looking back at it, it's just shocking that what I can't believe is that people still buy into it. That people are still dumb enough to go out and buy products merely because they see them advertised by someone that is famous, or because they think it'll make them happier in the long run. And it never does. If things made us happy, we would have learned long ago. But anyway, it's easy for folks to say things like, well, you know, money never made you happy, but it sure helps to have it. And hey, that's totally true. And I totally agree with that. Everybody needs money, and that's the problem. Some people have a lot more, some people have a lot less. But if you look at the actual statistics on happiness, the happiest places are the poorest places. It's true. It's really interesting, because some of the richest countries have some of the most miserable populations, take the most antidepressants, and, you know, and of course, you know, we have more antidepressants, and we probably have more doctors than a lot of poor places. But the point is, after they've gone in and interviewed people who live in these countries, and it's not just that, every one of you has probably watched documentaries in National Geographic or whatever when you were a kid, you know, or now that show people cruising along a river, you know, touring some country in some remote jungle in South America somewhere, and everybody they pass by smiles and waves, and they're all happy, you know. And they're welcomed into these areas with tribes, and there have been cases of people being killed by, like, you know, tribes as they're, you know, touring new areas and discovering new lands, and, you know, British explorers and shit. But the fact is, most of these people in general are good. People don't want to hurt other people. And I bring that up because using that, really, tribes are one of the last, not just tribes, but other cultures, smaller cultures, you know, there's very few left, and they're disappearing quickly. And some of these can be traced back, you know, thousands of years, if not longer. And they have amazing customs, you know. A great book to read is Jared Diamond wrote a book called Collapse. He also wrote one called Guns, Germs, and Steel. They're both great. Guns, Germs, and Steel talks about the Polynesian islands. I think it was that. No, there's a Polynesian island. No, this one is New Guinea, Papua New Guinea, and how when the explorers landed, you know, it was something like 50 years before they even knew that there were people on the inland, because there's a mountain range like pretty much on the circumference, and the inland is, you know, a big jungle area. So everybody stayed out there on the ports, and when they finally had airplanes to fly over, they saw all these jungles. Well, they went down and talked to the people. The people were welcoming and kind. They showed them how to farm. I should say the white people came in and tried to show the natives how to farm. And they had their own method of kind of growing vegetables in the woods, and they had these little plots. Well, the whites were like, hey, you know, plant them up on the hillside, and we'll show you how to do these terraces. So they dug these big terraces, and they grew their food. The first year there was a big rainstorm, and it washed out all the terraces, and a mudslide, and they lost their whole crop for the year. That's one of those learning lessons, that people have a stable idea of how to use their land, and that's ultimately what makes people happy, knowing their land. We feel sorry for people who seem to have less, but often they seem happier. I'm drinking a new tea. It's called Guayusa, Guayusa, and my vendor sent me some as a sample, these leaves, so I brewed it into a tea, and it's pretty delicious. It's supposed to have a more caffeine than tea, but it's much milder, and it has polyphenols and a bunch of other compounds in there, so good stuff. So this has been Carpo's Rant, I guess, for the day. I'm gonna turn off the camera now because it's been too long already, and I don't really have much else to say. So I wish you all luck on your endeavors for the day.